Okay, great. So we're recording now. So we're back for another session of research seminars, and really fortunate to be joined today by Dr. Kevin Coles. Kevin's an associate professor of archaeology, working in the Centre for Archaeology at here at Staffordshire University. Kevin's directed and published archaeological projects throughout the United Kingdom and Europe, and holds over 20 years experience in professional archaeology. His academic duties include acting as course leader for undergraduate and postgraduate provision here at Staffs, and Kevin teaches on a number of modules across the university, including forensic archaeology, genocide investigation, and residential summer schools in archaeology, conflict and genocide studies, and practical archaeology. So we're really happy to have you stepping over into the DTA research seminars, Kevin, and today I think you're going to talk about your practice, your research and practice, with touching on the kind of challenges of funding. So I'm going to hand over to you now. Thanks very much.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that, Becky. It's a sort of like almost coming home, because 18 months ago the Centre of Archaeology was in your school, so we've recently moved into JSS. So we've obviously got a lot of colleagues and contacts still in various departments in your school, so we work very closely with you guys as well. So yeah, just to sort of introduce what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to talk about funding and sort of the pitfalls of trying to come up with an idea, the sort of light bulb moment that gives you inspiration to fill in a funding application, and I'm going to sort of tell that story through some of the case studies lucky enough to get over the sort of last 5 years or so, and the hope there is if anything of interest is mentioned that I talk about in terms of your own research and your own plans for gaining funding further down the line, then obviously where we're based in Flaxman, and so we're always hoping to come and have a chat to anybody about cross departmental or cross school projects and filling in funding bids and then helping out where we can, really. So what I want to start with today is just a little bit more background about the Centre of Archaeology and what we do, and the sort of projects that we concentrate on over the sort of last 5 years or so. So predominantly we are a research centre. We do more than that, but we are predominantly a research centre that carries out a sort of a mix of research-led projects and then consultancy projects, covering a wide range of topics, starting obviously from archaeological projects that you might be more familiar with in terms of if you sort of think about what you know of the term archaeology, but also we specialise quite a lot these days in forensic archaeology, in particular the investigation of genocide and sites of mass violence. We do obviously have courses that we teach at the university. We have a master's programme and we have a new undergraduate programme that's also in the design stage at the moment. It's just gone through validation. So all of those are associated with the sort of genocide work that we do. And I guess because it's genocide investigation and more importantly genocide prevention that we tend to focus on at the moment, then obviously wider education and how our work fits into a non-academic arena is actually quite important. So we've had some success in that regard, in terms of how our academic work is then translated into a more educational setting to make the world a better place. So we spend a lot of time on the impact side of our research projects. And we do all of that with the sort of cutting edge facilities that Staffordshire University provides us with, both in the forensic department, but also in lots of other departments across the university, ranging from the smart hub and the digital kiln, and the IT and technical services staff who man the 3D printers and the scanners, right through to people who work in games and to support us from that point of view. So we have many colleagues, as you'll see in a minute, who we collaborate with. So I think if we were to sort of place in a nutshell where the centre is at the moment, then I think our research at the moment is focusing on coming up with a new terminology, a new subdiscipline within archaeology of humanitarian archaeology, and that is the title of our new undergraduate course that will start next year. And humanitarian archaeology is effectively that. It's about using archaeology to make the place better, to deal with the evidence left behind of conflict and genocide, identity, climate change, and the archaeological signatures that are left behind from those events that have happened in the past, and how they could inform mitigation strategies to deal with the problems that the globe is facing at the moment. So that's in a nutshell where our research is at the moment and where we've tried to focus our funding bids. So the core team, for those who don't know us, is myself and Caroline. Caroline is the director of the centre. I'm the project manager. We've got Will, who's the lecturer in archaeology, and we've recently, as of Monday this week, welcomed one of our former PhD students, Daria, who handed in December, and we've managed to secure her, or she's managed to secure herself, a 2-year postdoc position with us. So she is effectively joining us as staff from this point forward, which is great news. We also collaborate with other people I've mentioned already, colleagues in history, such as Alan and Sarah, Michael in fine art we do a lot with, and Rachel in the science centre. We have a cohort of PhDs as well at the moment, ranging from people doing 3D visualizations of objects, and that's Alex Haycock. So he's looking at photogrammetry and laser scanning of objects in people's personal collections rather than collections that are in a museum setting. So we have that end of the scale, the sort of visualization technological side of things, and then we have more traditional archaeological PhDs, such as Melinda, who's doing funerary archaeology in Albania. So we've got a great mix at the moment of early career and postgraduate researchers. So I think the starting point for a presentation on funding from me has to start with our primary goal at the moment to better enhance our sort of global standing in forensic archaeology and genocide investigation work. That has effectively been our catalyst for the past 5 years, and that is, in a sense, that has become our sort of flagship moment. I think any research centre or research individuals have one of these in their careers, sometimes more, where you come up with an idea and that overtakes all others, and it becomes a bit of an obsession, I suppose, to make the most of that idea as you can. And I think that's the point that we reached sort of 5 or 6 years ago. So we have been focusing quite heavily on this side of research, and because it's had some success in the sort of funding arena, once you have 1 or 2 large grants come through on a specific topic, that tends to be a magnet and it attracts others, and that's what we found with our particular topics that we're looking at the moment. So we use our methods to locate and record the evidence of genocide using forensic methods, and then we come up with innovative ways to disseminate that information to a wider public, and through education through schools. So the sort of funding that we've looked at have come from many sources, and I think that this presentation today is going to highlight some of those key sources that we've managed to get funding from. We've had European Union funding through HERA, Humanities in the European Research Area, and Horizon 2020 through a Marie Curie fellowship scheme. But predominantly, a lot of our work tends to come from small to medium level grants. So nothing huge, and ultimately they all add up, and I think that helps because the way that granting agencies tend to work most of the time these days is actually you have to have match funding in order to be eligible to apply for different funding pots. So the more smaller grants you can achieve, the more likely it is that you'll get more, because you'll be able to add these to your match funding portfolio and that's how we have tended to work with our investigations. So sort of our projects upcoming that we're hoping to gain funding for. So some of these have got funding, some of these haven't. We've got a team heading out to Bosnia next week who's going to look at the Bosnian genocide from the 1990s. And likewise, we've got a team at the moment in collaboration with Goldsmith University in London looking at the Namibian genocide of the Herero and the Nama, and that dates to the turn of the 20th century. So both those projects are coming, and we're in the process of gaining funding to allow those to happen. Also working with Alan Thomas in history and Becky. We've got a British Academy grant at the moment for work in Kurdistan. So fingers crossed on all of those, really. We've also had some success in impact accelerator projects. So impact accelerator projects are where you've already got a research project that is happened or is happening at the moment, and you feel there is more impact in the real world that can be generated from the results that you've come across. So these sort of top-up grants are solely to create impact based on your academic performance in those research projects. So we've got a couple of those at the moment that looking at demonstrating how art and theatre can be used to disseminate the results of archaeological work, and more specifically forensic archaeology of sites of the Holocaust or of other genocides. So that's sort of where we are at the moment with our own funding portfolio. So now the sort of bulk of the talk now is going to be, I suppose, some hints and tips, some things that I've picked up over the sort of last 10-15 years of filling in funding applications at Stafford University and my previous job as a research fellow at the University of Birmingham. So, you know, where do you start? What do you think of? Then, in a sense, the starting point has to be that initial idea. So I described it earlier as the light bulb moment. So I think that's important. I think you have to have that light bulb moment to really get to grips with how possible it is that an idea that you have will be funded. And so I think that the starting point has to be, think of its uniqueness. So who else is doing this sort of work at the moment, and can you see gaps in their work that you can, in a sense, jump upon to actually seek further funding? So the work that's going on in all areas, in all arenas, in all academics institutions at the moment are all going to be funded from the same agencies that you are looking at for your idea. So there is, in a sense, no point submitting a project if there are similar ones out there that are being funded already, because funding agencies talk to each other. They keep a close eye on who is funding what. So they will know that if your project idea is already being funded elsewhere, then it's very difficult for them to then fund you. So think of that uniqueness. In terms of uniqueness, think of innovation, and with innovation, that can either be a theoretical innovation, so a completely new perspective of looking at a subject or a discipline, or melding together disciplines that perhaps don't really have had much real world activity linking them in the past. So certainly some of our work in genocide studies and genocide investigation work, linking with theatre, for example, are two well-known disciplines, but they're not well known to be working together that often. So theoretical or practical innovation. So practical innovation is technological. So adopting technology that perhaps is useful in other disciplines and seeing a use or a benefit for it in your own studies, and then you will get funding for that type of practice. So I think the prime example of what I mean by uniqueness is 10 years ago, Caroline was at a conference and she was talking on the subject of the Holocaust and the archaeological remains of the Holocaust that might exist. And in that session, which I was in the audience for, effectively what predominantly happened there is a lot of the audience members in the questions and answer sessions at the end of the presentation basically said the Holocaust is too close to modern day. There are still too many people alive who've been through the Holocaust, and their immediate families have been through the Holocaust. It's a kind of worms that archaeologists shouldn't open. There's a passage of time that needs to take place before archaeological investigation should be used to define and look for evidence of the Holocaust. Now, we predominantly disagreed with all of those comments. For us, the fact that there were still people alive who's experienced these tragic events are the very people who archaeologists needed to be speaking to make sure that no evidence is lost as they pass away one by one through old age. So actually, that conference, in a sense, introduced the subdiscipline to the wider academic world of Holocaust archaeology. Now, since then, we've done much work on this topic. Caroline's published books on it. The first book in 2016 called Holocaust Archaeologies, and since then it's become a regular subdiscipline of archaeology and conflict archaeology. There are now numerous researchers and institutions across Europe looking at Holocaust sites that weren't doing it before. So that all came from a brave decision to study that particular section of history using archaeology, and as you can imagine, the funding fell into place for that pretty quickly. So since then we've worked at over 50 locations now, actually closer to 60. We've pioneered a new subdiscipline that is taught in other institutions. We've had memorials built on some of the sites that we've managed to identify, and we've worked directly with survivors of the Holocaust. So I think this is an example of where if you have an idea and it hasn't really taken hold previously in academia or in the wider world more generally, then run with it, because that is your best opportunity to get your work funded, because it has that novelty, it has that new feel about it. And I think that the sort of second lead on from that is to think about how your work and how your funding bids will make a difference in the real world. And that seems to be a common theme now that's popping up in conferences and granting applications and in interviews. If you get to an interview stage for a big grant, it tends to obviously focus on the academic impact of your work. That's granted, that will be a thing you'll have to think about, but also how your work will make things better. And that is, again, something which we've had to deal with quite a lot in a lot of the work that we do. And the way we sort of frame our work is by trying to make things better through education. So we try to use our archaeological projects to tackle anti-Semitism and racial hatred and xenophobia in multiple countries where the projects take place and where we do our work. Much closer to home, we also do mental well-being projects. So again, trying to use archaeology as a rehabilitation for returning soldiers who have problems relating back to real life, or the recently retired and that type of individual who is just looking for the next part of their life, the next chapter. So how archaeology can be used in that as a social benefit for the social good. So always think about how your work can relate to the actual real world and what impacts you can have, because again, that's a good solid section of most research grants, even if they don't have sections in the application form that specifically says what impacts are you making. You will be being marked on that, and you will be your work will be reviewed on that basis. So the example of that I've chosen just to talk about is the Lake District Holocaust Project. So many won't know this story, but it has been in the press quite recently. 300 child survivors of the Holocaust came to the United Kingdom in 1945. So just towards the end of the war, they were liberated from a ghetto in the Czech Republic. And these 300 children, most of them boys, but some of them girls, have been warmly nicknamed the Windermere Boys. And their story has now become quite famous because of the way that the Windermere community took these young children from the Holocaust into their life on the banks of Lake Windermere in the Lake District. So we've joined forces with the Lake District Holocaust Project to fully understand the buildings which have now been demolished, where these 300 children stayed in Windermere when they were first making their transition between leaving the horrific conditions of the ghetto and beginning a new life in the United Kingdom. So we worked closely with the Lake District Holocaust Project. We took our students to excavate some of these buildings that these survivors stayed in. We met the actual two of the people who were one of the Windermere Boys. So the picture on the screen now there is two of them shaking hands and looking at the archaeology of the building that they once stayed in. We got our students to interview them, which affected their perspective on life, I think. So they left us very different people from when they started our course, I think. So it's these type of projects that can influence people, not only students but also members of the public. School children visited this particular project quite often, and because of that, the funding followed, because they saw the social benefits of what we were doing. So I think the next point I want to make is think international. Obviously, it sort of goes against what I've previously just been talking about in terms of local projects for local communities and social action. But actually, finding international partners is not as difficult as you might think. If you're having an idea on how to make a local community making their life better, you won't be surprised to hear that there'll be other people in other countries who are also thinking along those lines. So if you can connect with those individuals, then actually your local small community project can very quickly become international, because you can partner with the network that you create across the globe. So for example, if you're doing a project with a group of school children from somewhere in Staffordshire, then is there a group of school children that's in another country that could come and take part in your project and then do the swap? So there's archaeology going on in the Czech Republic or in Africa or in Asia. So always try to find international partners, and international partners takes your chances of getting funding and increases them, because all of a sudden, if it's international, then you're not just looking at people who fund work in the United Kingdom, but then you open up other branches of funding across continents or in other countries. And also teaming up with people who are international also spreads the burden out a little bit on getting your joint project funded. There are more of you then looking for funding opportunities in their universities or from partners from their own part of the world. So don't forget local specificities, but try and think on a global level, and you'll increase your funding opportunities there. So the example on the screen there is showing some work that we did, which I'll come on to at the end of this talk, Treblinka Extermination Camp in Poland, where we received funding to go and do some work there, which identified lots of archaeological objects. And then we did an archaeological exhibition in Poland, on the site of the museum that's there currently, which is the picture you can see. But then we also had a travelling version of that exhibition, not using the objects themselves because they couldn't leave Poland because of that's their international law. But the travelling exhibition was using 3D printed or 3D visualizations of those objects, which then went to the Wiener Library in London, and we hosted on our own campus at Staffordshire University. So travelling versions of exhibitions is a good way to link across country borders. This is another project which again had, I think, was well funded simply because it had that educational element in terms of making the world a better place. So here, the Recording Cultural Genocide project was associated with work that we were doing in Poland and Ukraine before the invasion. So again, it was using archaeological methods to map cultural genocide in Jewish cemetery sites, and predominantly the Jewish cemetery sites that was just desecrated by the Nazis during the early part of the Holocaust and World War II, where tombs were destroyed or were removed and used as building materials, and subsequently Jewish cemeteries became the site of mass graves for the murdered Jewish populations of towns and villages right across Eastern Europe. So we teamed up with a foundation, the Matsiva Foundation, based in Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States, and some local partners in Poland to effectively just make an appearance at these sort of sites, cleaning them up, recording the evidence of cultural genocide that we found on the site, identifying the locations of mass graves, and did that with as much local support and help as we could. So members of the local communities were there, members of the Peace Corps would join us, scout groups, that type of thing, because ultimately these sort of attitudes of why it's a problem still in Eastern Europe. Anti-Semitism and racism is still present in today's society. So to combat that, you need to educate young people, and that's why we chose sort of scout groups and school groups to help us do this work. So again, so it's an example of how to complete academic research, but whilst doing it in such a way that it benefits society in a more wide-reaching way. And if you do that, then again, it's a few more ticks in the box to get your work funded. And then if you're talking about work being funded, you can't really go wrong if you head down the route of digital technology and advancing specific equipment or visualization, that type of project. So for archaeology, we don't tend to invent things that often. The way archaeology and archaeologists work is we steal what other people are doing and make use of it in an archaeological context. So the sort of radar technology that we use, or the visualization technology that we use, these have all come from advancements in other disciplines, whether it be the search for fossil fuels and the sort of oil and gas research, or work that's going on in games technology. So that's how we tend to do it. So if you can come up with a new and innovative way to link together existing cutting edge research in one discipline and bring it into your own, and perhaps be the first person or the first group of people to try and do that, then again, that is going to look very good for your sort of request to get funding. And again, that's what we try to do. So all of those, what I've talked about so far, are specific project funding tips, I think. But also there's the fellowship route. So don't obviously discount fellowships either. There's a much more higher success rate if you apply for fellowships than if you apply for project funding grants. And they really do offer you the opportunity to go off and work with other departments, other institutions, and enhance your CV make connections, and ultimately, I suppose, leave behind the administration and institution-led issues that can come with holding an academic post that includes teaching and that type of thing. If you get funded for a fellowship, then 9 times out of 10, the fellowship will be a research-only fellowship, so you can dedicate your whole time, or maybe 95% of your time, towards completing that research idea. So look for fellowships. Fellowships exist irrespective where you are on your sort of career ladder, ranging from postgraduate and student fellowships right the way through to senior fellowships, where you have to have been sort of in academia a very long time and have a proven track record of portfolio projects behind you. So fellowships is a useful thing to think about as well. Obviously, there are downsides to fellowships as well. Predominantly, they tend to be sort of solo pieces of work. So you will be traveling to another base at another institution, most probably, to sort of begin your network building within a new institution. So sort of what I want to focus on now is specific elements of funding, which comes from different types of sources that don't follow the usual Arts Council or Leave the Hume or British Academy type funding. And one I want to touch on for many reasons, but I think predominantly because we've had a lot of success, but also within your school, you have expertise in this particular thing. So gaining funding from the media, and particularly TV documentaries. We've done lots now of these things. Both myself and Caroline have been on numerous ones funded by the BBC and National Geographic, Smithsonian, Channel 4, Channel 5. So we've had our research funded with the end product not only being an academic paper, but also being then a TV documentary. So this has many benefits. It's obviously a non-standard route for getting funding for your project, but it gives academics an opportunity to hugely extend the reach of their work and to offer unique pathways to impact. So for those of you who's been involved in the recent Research Excellence Framework, REF, will know that impact is a big thing at the moment, but impact is not the same as reach. So if you have an academic paper that is read 100,000 times, or if you have a TV documentary that is viewed by 40 million people, that is demonstrating that your work is being reached, your work is being read, or your work is being viewed. But in reality, that is an impact. Impact then is about how your work that has either been read or people who've watched your TV documentaries, how has that affected their own professional practice or their own way of life, or how they think about things. So it's generating that evidence that is important, and TV documentaries are a good way to do that, because a lot of people who watch TV documentaries and are affected by it, positively or negatively, then tend to find you out and send you emails. That sounded quite ominous, that, didn't it? Find you out. Send you emails or send you letters saying that, you know, they watch your TV documentary, your work is fascinating, you're doing great research, and a lot of them then go on to say why they found it fascinating or how it impacted them. So it's a good way to get that feedback. So it can be an alternative funding stream, and a good way to sort of sell it to the editors or the commissioning editors of TV documentaries is if you can demonstrate that it's working with cutting edge technology or things that people haven't seen before, then again it can do many things. And what we found about being funded through TV companies or the production companies who act as their sort of mediators, it's to do with the fact that they can open a lot of doors. So a lot of our research strands tend to occasionally come to a dead end because we can't get access to something, or we can't get permission to do something purely on the basis of academic research. But having a TV production company who can then assist, it has been successful in opening doors which you would not necessarily have been able to open yourself. So having that, to be fair, that's probably it's not a good, I don't think it's a good view on society that it takes a TV documentary to actually open some doors for you to better enhance your research. But it's a sad reality of the world that actually if you have a TV producer on your project, then they are going to be able to get access to people. People are going to find time to help them where they might not find time to help you. So yeah, it's a sad state of affairs, but it's the truth. It's what goes on. And obviously, getting funding to do TV documentaries also helps your institutional reputation. Marketing and PR material for your student courses back at your home university. Student recruitment, if again you've got courses that are recruiting on a specific topic. But also it gives you the opportunity to get your students involved in some exciting projects. And if they're being filmed, then again, it's just anything that makes your course look good is going to produce good student feedback at the end of the day, which for those of you involved in that type of thing at the university will know that's important. So the challenges, though, in using TV documentaries to fund your work, you obviously have to understand how the process works. So the process works in that come up with an idea, come up with something that you think is going to be interesting enough for people to want to view. So it's all about getting viewing figures, and then you approach either a production company or a commissioning editor yourself, and they either like the idea or they don't like the idea. And so what you will find will happen, and this is where you can be quite clever about it, is think about your own discipline and think about what's coming up in the next 2 or 3 calendar years. Because what commissioning editors will do is they'll look for anniversaries, they'll look for specific events that are happening, and they'll plan ahead to try and think of what could we do. Prime example of that is obviously we've just had Shakespeare's 450-year anniversary since he died. So we started making a documentary many years before that, on the basis that Channel 4, Channel 5, BBC will all be looking for programmes related to Shakespeare that they can air at around that period. So think about what is coming up, and then approach a production company about your project, about idea. What you will find, though, is obviously if you get funded for £30,000, ultimately what will happen is the budget will get squeezed, and you probably won't get that money. They will look to cut corners as filming goes over, expenses go over, and then they'll try to cut your budget down. So be aware of that when you plan your projects. And then also you have to be careful, because ultimately you are, even though it's your research that they might be following, or it might be a research project that you have a film crew there, sort of fly on the wall style, watching what goes on. Ultimately, you probably won't have a say on the editorial process. So you need to be aware of that, that you won't be in control of what the final documentary looks like. So we've been burnt a few times by that. So make sure that if you can see the edits before they go out, then that's something as a very minimal standard that should be completed. So at least you know what's in the final program, and then you can prepare a media strategy for when it gets aired on national TV or international TV. It's also exhausting and difficult. You will find that your own project is 200% more challenging to actually take place. So for us doing archaeology, we're talking about sort of excavation, being on site, but it really can relate to anything, even if it's filming in a laboratory, or doing some digital animations and that type of thing. Doing any task is much more difficult if you're being filmed doing it, and the things that you won't think about suddenly becomes all important, and you have to repeat things several times. So this is a very quick video. So what I want to do to pull this presentation together and come up with a conclusion really is this project, the Accessing Campscapes project, really sums up all of what I've spoken about previously, actually. So it's an international project that gained funding, and it had impact in the real world. So I'll just play this very short video for a couple of minutes.
At Staffordshire University in the United Kingdom, a pioneering team of archaeological investigators are working to discover and record new evidence of atrocities at sites of modern conflict. From infamous Holocaust sites like Auschwitz and Treblinka to individual killing sites deep within the forests of Europe, the Centre of Archaeology uses cutting-edge archaeological methods to research these emotive and sensitive sites. One of their most recent projects sees the team join a group of international experts from universities across Europe to examine the history and legacies of 20th century internment camps. This project, called Accessing Campscapes, looks at the traces of mass violence and terror at a number of camps across Europe. Westerbork in the Netherlands, Treblinka in Poland, Fulstad in Norway, Jasenovac and Stara Gradiška in Croatia, Bergen-Belsen in Germany, the former Roma camp Lety, and the former uranium gulag labour camps in the Jakimov region of the Czech Republic. This short video focuses on the archaeological methodologies that form the basis for on-site investigation at these campscapes.
My name is Kevin Coles and I'm the archaeological project manager for this.
Enough of that. I'm here. You don't need a video of me.
At Staffordshire.
So the Accessing Campscapes project brought together different universities from across Europe. So I think that's the first funding tick that we had here. We were involved. The University of Cambridge was involved. The University of Amsterdam was involved. A university in Barcelona, a university in Berlin. So the collaborative group brought different expertise to the project. So within the project was obviously looking at these campscapes in terms of the evidence that was present on them today, but also how museums and national and international governments view these sites in terms of how they are managing them and looking after them or not looking after them, as it turned out, and how understanding the events that took place can help that process work better. So so because of that, we had experts in many different areas, and we did work in numerous countries that you've just seen in the video there. So we integrated archaeology, but also we brought in technology, and so we had UAV surveys done of these sites to produce three-dimensional landscape models, which can then act as visualizations for digital platforms in education. So a prime example of that is with the Staro Gradiška Hospital, which was at the Jasenovac complex in Croatia. And this hospital was a building that is, as you can see, falling apart. It's not going to be actually in existence that much longer because it's not preserved or looked after in any way. But it was a former hospital site within a prison complex that has been the location of numerous mass violence and events of torture associated with many different conflicts throughout history. But obviously the one we were focusing on was the efforts during both the Holocaust and the Yugoslav wars in the late 90s. So the visualization aspect was capturing these sites as they are now, on the basis that in a way understanding that they're not going to be around that much longer. So scanning both the internal and external parts of these particular sites before any further damage is done to them, and then producing what is effectively visualization models which then can be used obviously as an important resource because these sites are not going to be like this that much longer. But also it creates the basis for educational tools. You can talk to students and school children about these sites, even if these sites don't exist anymore in this format. But also you can create more awareness of these type of sites and how important they are in the wider world, and the fact that because perhaps this one won't be around that much longer, it's the more we can tell the story of this building, the more chance we've got of when we find the next one, then actually things can be done to protect these spaces. So here this particular animation goes into the basement where a lot of these torture took place, particularly in the Holocaust, but also in the Yugoslav wars as well. And you can see there's still furniture in them and that type of thing. So it's an important record. Part of this project also looked at Treblinka extermination camp. So a more famous project, a more famous site. It's known through being one of the main death camps in Nazi-occupied Poland. It's one of the Operation Reinhard camps. So it's been studied before from a historical point of view, but certainly not an archaeological point of view. So our work started here long before the HERA project that I'm talking about now, but the HERA project certainly helped for us to get a better understanding of this particular site. And one of the key parts of it was to identify the location of the gas chambers, which we managed to do through non-invasive investigations and later on through the excavation of test pits, which identified lots of objects dated to not only the gas chamber building itself, but also some personal objects and items which effectively were somehow they were taken as far as the gas chambers during their very short experiences from the train station at Treblinka to the gas chamber building itself. So a lot of their personal possessions would have been removed in special barracks long before them getting to the gas chambers. So the fact that we were finding still personal objects in and around the old gas chambers is actually quite important, because these objects are what people did not want to lose. They were important to them. We also found that the old gas chambers at Treblinka was modelled on a Jewish bathhouse. So the victims who were walking into that space would not have been aware that they were walking into a gas chamber. It would have just looked like a ritual bathhouse that they would have been used to using at home pre-war. So it adds an extra level of deception that the Nazis were doing on this particular site. And then we've pulled together some digital resources, again for education predominantly, but also other researchers as well. So a lot of these objects that I've just spoke about there, and some others, have been scanned using laser scanning and photogrammetry technologies. And we have a lot of online digital platforms across different websites, but we also have a Sketchfab account at the university, which we obviously house a lot of our 3D scans. So you're more than welcome to click on those and have a look. Also, as part of this work, we got some funding to carry out a LiDAR survey, which, for those of you who don't sort of know the archaeological process, LiDAR is a laser scanning technique that is fired or used from a plane or a drone flying high above your particular site, and it sends laser beams down. And when a laser beam hits something, it bounces back and records a point. So obviously the first thing you would expect it to hit would be the canopy of trees, which is correct. You're right, that's what it hits first. But also there's no tree canopy that's dense enough. There are still laser beams that project down and manage to get through the canopy and hit the ground and are then reflected back. So it creates the opportunity to see two types of landscapes in one survey: the realistic landscape, which includes the trees, which is the image on the left, and then the image on the right is a landscape view of the lasers that went through the trees and hit the ground. So in other words, the trees have been digitally removed, and what you're looking at now is a digital terrain model of the site at Treblinka. And in doing that, you can effectively remove the trees from a particular site and see disturbances and depressions that are consistent with archaeological features. So here at it's not quite the Treblinka death camp, it's further south, but it's called the execution site, which, as the name suggests, is a site where executions and death took place. So again, aerial images from above, you just see trees. But if you do a LiDAR survey, take the trees away, then you can see the depressions that are mass graves in those things. So again, because it was sort of exciting technology, then again it hit all the questions that we were being asked from the funders to identify new ways to use technology to identify something new. So just as a sort of conclusion then, so our Accessing Landscapes project, it addressed a problem, how these campsites are used and what new evidence we can find on them. And in doing that, these problems were present across Europe. So the problems that the German government were facing in terms of its campscapes were pretty much the same as what was being faced in France or in Norway or in Spain. Not only with camps dating the Holocaust, but also camps dating to lots of other types of conflict. So it ticked a lot of boxes on that front. It was interdisciplinary, so we had experts in obviously archaeology and forensics, but also history and memory studies, IT specialists, and also the media. So we did have a TV documentary following us around, which again part funded some of the work, and we had a two TV documentaries out of it as well. Not only that, is we had our own film crew from your school actually, who followed us around and created more educational based videos for us, which we then have also translated into numerous other languages, including Ukrainian, because we had a request from a Ukrainian university and to have them translated so they could teach their own students our own skills and methods that we used. I think the real success of this particular project, though, and again what probably got a lot of funding, is because we used a lot of non-government organisations and project partners in the work. So again, making an impact on a local level. So local charities, international organisations and charities such as the Peace Corps, but also look for local companies and businesses who, if you need something doing for a particular project, again, if you can find a company who's local, then again, that's going to look good on your application. So it was devised right from the beginning with impact in mind, not only reach and significance, but also the range of dissemination methods that we chose. So the TV documentaries, academic journals, books, web platforms, we hosted lots of workshops within all of the project partner sites that we came across, but also invited project partners from one country. When we hosted the next workshop in the next country, then the other project partners all came. So ultimately, we had the same group of museums and curators and local organisations and companies who effectively came to everything, whichever country it was in. So it was really good. But also, what we found is that once you get funding, particularly from like a HERA standard grant, you will also be able to use that as a basis to apply for other smaller grants to act as sort of add-ons. So in other words, this is our project, it's really good, it's done all this stuff, but actually with an extra 10,000 or an extra 15,000, we can then do this, and that's really looked upon favourably, because obviously you've demonstrated to the new funder that you've been successful in acquiring a big grant. The big grant is going or has gone very well, and you've recognised what now can be done to make it even better. So obviously thinking about it in those terms increases your chances of getting money. So that's it. So that's my presentation. So if you want to connect with us, we're obviously on the usual social media platforms. Not myself, I'm a social media technophobe, but Caroline and Will and the other members of the team are on Twitter and everything else. We also have obviously a website that you can look on and catch up to date with our recent news, and keep an eye out for any publications that we might post across the university, and we'll be happy to help you out on any funding bids that you've got in the future. So, okay, Becky, how was that?
That was fantastic, Kevin. Thank you so much. Yeah, really rich, really fascinating. I know Emma's got a question in the chat. I've got some. Emma, we might come to your question just in a minute, because it's quite specific to an aspect of the of one of the projects. Unsurprisingly, given what you've posted in the chat already, but I just wanted to come back and focus in on a couple of the points that you made about funding, because I think, you know, you've done a brilliant job of unpacking a really complex project in relation to funding, but there's still bits in there where I just think, well, but how did you, you know, but how? So when you talk about that particular project, and you spoke about connecting with local foundations, is it Matsuva Foundation, and local Polish and Ukrainian partners, which obviously is so important, isn't it? Because this material is deeply sort of nationally personal, I guess, as to them, as well as, you know, significant internationally. How do you know who to go and talk to in these international spaces?
I think the starting point has to be that there's two starting points, really. The first starting point is who you meet at conferences.
Right.
So the Matsuva Foundation, for example, is one really good example of we met the director of that particular foundation at a conference, and he saw us speak about another project totally unrelated, and he basically introduced himself, and we got to know him, and then we got to know his work, and it sort of snowballs from there. So it's these totally by chance meetings tends to be where a lot of our true partnerships that we've sort of retained over many years has sort of grown and blossomed. So that's one. I think the other one is making yourself visible in the areas that you want to do this work in. So a lot of our work in Poland and before the invasion of Ukraine, because you're there and you have a physical presence on these sites, people see what you're doing, and that's when they introduce themselves. They come to the site and ask questions. Then they might say, well, you know, we've got a little museum around the corner that you might not be aware of. So it's that having that presence, I think, is the key for us. So it's not being the sort of academic style research that takes place elsewhere and remotely and doesn't really have that community element to it. I think if you need to go there, you need to be a part of the community, perhaps do a workshop or a seminar or a public lecture in advance. You know, find a local group, so for us an archaeology group or a history group, just so you can, you know, do a lecture and just get yourself, it's like getting a foot in the door at a local community level. And for us, that seems to be the starting block, really.
Yeah, look, that makes so much sense, and actually ties straight into my second question, which was going to be, these are such sensitive sites. Obviously you have done work in the UK, but most of them are, you know, elsewhere in Europe. How, you know, who invites you in? Who are the gatekeepers? Who do you need to meet? But clearly you're saying it's local community. Yeah,
I think being honest, I think the project that we've done in the UK related to the Holocaust and persecution during World War II has been the project that's been the hardest to actually get up and running. So you know, you'll be aware of Alderney better than most. That project was awful, and that was in the UK. That was in the Channel Islands. So actually, we find that a lot of the work associated with the Holocaust in the areas where the Holocaust took place is much more positive. because they are aware of their own history, and they are aware of the amount of work that still needs to be done to identify the evidence in these locations, that anybody from anywhere in the world who's showing an interest in researching this is seen positively by those communities involved. So you obviously have to do it correctly. So it's not only the local community, for us anyway, that we have to be aware of, but there could be religious implications that obviously the Jewish community in these places were decimated during the Holocaust, so they don't necessarily have the religious links and roots in those rural towns in the middle of Ukraine or Poland anymore. But ultimately there is still Jewish burial law that you have to adhere to. So making sure that you complete the work within those guidelines as well is important. So not only local level permissions and that type of thing, but also sort of international religious standards that you have to adhere to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got one more question, and then I'll bring Emma's question in, because I guess this question is really just into thinking about workload and the scale of a team you might need, and how you delegate within that team. Because I'm thinking, the proportion of time spent on researching for funding bids versus the approval, rating or percentage that comes back. What is that proportion, and how do you manage that within what you have as a really small team, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's very hard. Our working day doesn't stop really. So if you've got a big grant that needs to go in, then it's what you're doing at midnight, and that's just the way that I don't think it's even been in a small team. I think you can be even in a big team, but as we all know, day-to-day responsibilities working at a university is going to impact upon the time that you have to do that sort of work. So that you have got to be prepared to sort of work outside of hours to try and get your research bids in. And again, that's not ideal, and that's not where the university or any university wants to be with its staff. But it's just a sad reality that, particularly at the moment, that it needs to be that way. How do we do it? It's a good question. I don't know how we do it sometimes, to be fair. I think you've really got to be dedicated to want to do the work, and that always helps. But also, obviously, be quite fluid in terms of managing your workload, but also passing workload around your small team as best you can. So if there's a big grant that is due in, and you personally have a lot of work to do on it, and it can't really be anybody else, then is there anybody else in your small team who for that 2 weeks or 3 weeks can take a little bit of your teaching away, or do that marking that you need to do, or go to that meeting on campus, or do your academic support time, just so they can take the pressure off you a little bit to allow dedicated time? Because ultimately, whether it's a publication or whether it's a grant application, it will always be better if you can have dedicated time where you can put your mind on one thing and one thing only, and you will produce something better for it. So I think that's the answer, really. It's not always possible, it's not always easy, but if you can move things around, kick things into the longer grass temporarily, worry about it later, just to give yourself that dedicated time, is that's what we tend to do. And as I say, it doesn't always work. You have to do that session after you've put the kids to bed, or had your Chinese takeaway, or whatever you do in the evening, where you then have to get your laptop out again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I reckon the way that you can pull on the energy you need to do that is to go right back to where you started from, and talk about the idea and your commitment to the idea. And I guess, while that holds, the rest of it will happen somehow, won't it? That's
exactly. Yeah. And that's why fellowships are not to be dismissed either, because obviously you could have commitments closer to home where a fellowship abroad is not possible, but if a fellowship abroad is possible, then it's going to be highly beneficial for your CV, but also you are going to get dedicated time to do your research. And if that's what you're interested in and you have the ability to do it, then that should be the top of your priority list, I think.
Yeah, great. Brilliant. I could keep on asking questions, but I won't, because what I'm going to do is I'll ask Emma's, and then I'll let you go, Kevin. So Emma, because you can't see the chat, Emma asked, do you have any breakdowns of your photogrammetry or the photogrammetry workflow? She asks, what's the desire to digitize? Is it digital archiving, for accessibility, for preservation? What's the rationale around that strand?
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of it is to do. I think we've had a shift in this, actually. I think if you would have asked that question 2 or 3 years ago, my answer would have been it's about creating a visual record of artifacts or objects or sites that are not easily accessible by any other means. So for example, a lot of our artifacts in Poland, as I stated, can't leave the country. So how do you use those objects to teach Holocaust education in other countries if you can't physically use the objects in your demonstrations and talks? So I think that was a big part of it in the early days. It's using this technology to better allow access to these sort of sites where permission is not allowed or not granted, or the objects can't leave the host country. So I think that was a starting point. I think we've sort of had a shift, I think. More recently, we've 2 of our PhDs at the moment, Alex and more recently Jade, who's just started 2 weeks ago. They are both using photogrammetry to scan objects which are in personal collections. So access to these is entirely a no-go because they're such personal objects to that individual family. So you're talking here. So for example, we've recently scanned photogrammetry and laser scanned a holy book that a Holocaust survivor gave his daughter. Then he passed away. So this book is really important to her, but also in the inscription in the book is a handwritten note from the chief rabbi of Poland to her dad, saying how grateful the chief rabbi was for all his work that he was doing looking after school children during the Holocaust. So all of a sudden this item is dramatically important, but it's never going to leave that family's collection. So we've sort of had a change now, in that both those PhDs are looking at the link between objects and materiality, but also the families themselves. So we focus a lot less on location and landscape surveys, but focusing on how these 3D technologies can actually help families themselves obviously get to terms with the events that's happened in their family life, but also opening up a whole new avenue of research for artifacts that we didn't know was there. So I think that's where we are at the moment. In terms of workflow and how these sort of surveys are done, it can be quite problematic because not everybody, particularly family members, don't understand the technology. So there's an educational element to the fact that these techniques are non-destructive, and some people aren't comfortable bringing them onto campus. So we have to have the technology that's remote and movable, so it can move locations. So we quite regularly, for example, the Lake District Holocaust project that we are doing at the moment, we quite regularly set up shop at Windermere Library, which is local to the groups and communities that we want to sort of connect with, I suppose. So we go to them rather than they come to us, and then we sort of do the scanning as we go on.
Yeah, fascinating. Because and clearly that ties into your sort of mission statement around humanitarian archaeology. It's sort of putting the human at the front of the archaeology, and that by necessity means it's plays out in a domestic space, perhaps just as much as a public space. So I think that's really
absolutely. And there's, I suppose, the secondary element to it is to do with sort of education as well. Because of the cyber projects that we do, actually finding a way to connect with perhaps the younger generation is actually quite difficult. So we try our best to try and get the younger people to come to site and take part in our projects, but you are also going to have a generation that perhaps don't want to do that, but are quite happy to turn on their PlayStation or their PCs and play games, or look at virtual objects and virtual things and virtual museums and that type of thing. So we also are aware that the data that we're gathering here is going to be useful in that regard as well. It's engaging with perhaps people who wouldn't be up to coming out to field work and being involved, but they certainly would be up to sort of viewing that material and engaging with that material. And we sort of done some pilot projects along those lines. Nothing to do with Holocaust archaeology. It's not happier archaeology, unfortunately. It's still sad. But the old hospital in Stoke was recently demolished. All 44 buildings associated with that place taken away. And there was a big outcry from a lot of the Stoke-on-Trent community, because it was their maternity wing and it's where they gave birth to their kids. And there was a big problem with this building being demolished. And so we laser scanned it and produced some educational tools, some fly-throughs and some scans of some of the objects. So yes, it's gone, and it's sad that it's gone, but we still have that resource that can then be used in other ways to build stories around that building, and that seemed to satisfy some of the issues that were going on with it.
Yeah, brilliant. How amazing. Yeah, Emma's loving that. I see that she's I reckon you'll be hearing from Emma. Sure, your new researchers will be hearing from Emma shortly thereafter. I don't know if anyone else has a question out there. I'm not seeing anything else popping up in the chat. So we've managed to go through the whole 2 people time slot with just us. So that's
there we go.
That's good work, Kevin. I really appreciate it. Honestly, I think that's such a fantastic wealth of information you've shared for us, and it's going to live on the YouTube channel, and you can point we can point researchers to that and people from beyond. So because it's sort of publicly available on the YouTube channel, by all means share that link with prospective PhD students or well, I guess undergrads and master's students as well for yourself. So yeah, thanks so much. I know how busy you guys are, so very much appreciated. And thanks to those who joined us as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, I'll see you in the reel.
You will. Take care.
Okay.
Thanks everybody.
Bye, everyone.